doing a whole range of other shows. I'm going to be doing a review with Michael Roberts, for example, of the Tlingit people and the President and CEO of the First Nations Development Institute in Colorado, where we'll be exploring issues in Native American culture and civil society. And that's going to be really phenomenal. I hope you all can join us. So right now we're going to get this show on the road, and I will try to emote during my intro to prepare us for these great leaders who are going to guide us through the ideas inherent in theater. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're discussing the impact that theater has in communities with our special guests, Bryce Alexander, CEO and Artistic Director of the Naples Players, Josh LaBelle, Executive Director of the Seattle Theater Group, and Mike Morelli, Executive Director of the Missoula Community Theater Incorporated. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we'll take 3 snap polls during the show. We'll announce results. And your questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of our screen will be included in our discussions. So thank you all for joining us. Bryce, Josh, Mike, it's just great to see you. I hope as directors, how did I do? Was I okay with my intro? Should I have been a little bit more resonant or show a little bit of a humble approach? What do you think?
I think you're right on, Mark. I think you're crushing it.
Yeah, nailed it.
Well, let's go to you, Bryce. I just want to set this up because we did some research, as we always do, and the first theater performance in America that we know of, and I'm sure there were performances earlier, was in 1690 at Harvard. The first theater was built in Philadelphia in 1766. And by the 1790s, there were troops based in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston. Theater spread from there to communities all over the United States. And so it's wonderful to have you here. We've got Florida represented, Montana, we have Washington State. So let's talk about some of the challenges of live theater in today's environment, what abides, what has not changed, and what are we doing today in order to bring people into those theaters in a post-COVID world where we've all been isolated? How do we approach this, Bryce? So let's start with you. Give us a sense of your work in Naples and talk a little bit about how you approach theater in the modern age.
Sure. Yeah, the Naples Players is, we're a really unique organization, certainly to our region. Our mission is to build community through access to the power of theater. And so for us, everything we do focuses on the way that you can engage different audiences to come together to share not only an experience related to the arts, but with each other. And so, even in our post-performance surveys, we ask, did you talk to your neighbors and do you feel closer to your community because of your experience with us tonight? And so we're trying to think a little more holistically about how it is we bring people together in the current age where politics is at the forefront of many, many people's minds.
No, really?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy to think about, but the arts has always pushed, and so how is it that we bring people together from very different ideologies to have a productive conversation as part of building community? So we really look at that in 3 ways. One is through performance. About 50,000 audience members come here a year. How do we help each of those different demographics who live in our community come together to have a conversation with each other or to have a communal experience that builds community? It could be through arts education, teaching people how to express their emotions or host a great Zoom webinar or helping students express their emotions. Or it could be through a wellness through the arts program that we have, where we partner with 40 other nonprofits. And the goal is to help their service organizations serve their constituents in new ways. I'll give you an example. We partner here locally with the Naples Therapeutic Writing Center, and we take veterans who have PTSD, and once they're on the horses and going through the horse therapy, we take it the next step and we help those veterans express their emotions, to think through the experience they've had to process their trauma. And so we can do that with young women who've experienced trauma in their teenage years. We could do it with people in the hospitals whose loved ones are dying. We could do it with children, seniors, adults, people who are have family members who've been removed from the United States. So in all of these different avenues, if we can think of the theater as a central location for communities to come together, just like they did when the Greeks and Romans were doing theater and stopping wars to bring people together, then we can redefine how America sees the value of arts and help the theater in every community be a place of communal building, a sort of societal conscious, and a place for good rhetoric for people to come together.
And one of the things that we wanted to do with this show is we wanted to take sort of the entire country. So let's move over to Washington. So we've got basically the catty corner of the corners of the country. Josh, how are you looking at what you're doing over at the Seattle Theater Group in terms of today's body politic, where right now we've got people who say, oh, you can't talk about certain topics, right? You can't teach certain histories. You're either right or you're wrong, and if you're wrong, suppress voice. I mean, how do you deal with all those issues that Bryce was discussing, and ensuring that you get to engage a whole cross section of your community?
Yeah, Mark, it's a great question, and I suppose in Seattle, the Seattle Theater Group has become hyper focused around our vision. Our vision is to be the people's theater, a place where all are welcomed and represented. And I suppose a vision is something that you never really achieve. You're constantly striving for. A lot of nonprofits, all of us are sort of saddled with the notion of having a mission, a vision, values, et cetera, et cetera. And I find it so interesting. It's quite hard to lead an organization and expect everybody to be maintaining a focus that wide. So I found it to be super helpful coming out of COVID to narrow the focus. Not that we still don't have a mission, but to narrow the focus and become a vision-focused organization. And I think that helps us connect back to what your question was all about, which is, how in this world of people staying so separate, whether it's around politics or anti-vaxxers or whatnot, I think as the People's Theater, we have a responsibility to be intentional about whom we're engaging, whom we're speaking to, and to not be afraid of running into topics that may be hard for people to deal with.
So are you saying that theater by its nature is kind of a place where all topics are on limits instead of certain topics off limits? This whole idea of certain things, the whole anti movement, right? I define myself by what I'm against. I'm against woke, or I'm against this.
Right.
It's that I'm against vaxes. I'm against, it just seems that what you're saying is that the theater is, as you're defining it, is a safe space for grappling, and you can only grapple if things are on limits rather than off.
That's correct. I think it's very dangerous for any institution to get sucked into this notion of drawing lines around what you will and won't do. Yes, I think all of us are mindful, and none of us want to be, veering into the waters that could be hate speech. But truly, it's quite disturbing to see how separated people let themselves become. And in the arts, the beauty is we've got the responsibility of doing the opposite. I mean, in Seattle, it's quite easier to do, right? My daughter just became bat mitzvah, and we had a drag queen at her bat mitzvah to really deliver that sense of place to our guests. Many of whom were flying in from out of town. And it was a beautiful thing, like out of town in terms of other zones in which that wouldn't have been kosher. You follow?
Yeah, got it. Mike, how do you see things from the perspective of Montana? Are you seeing this same idea, and as a children's community theater, but also a children's community theater that serves all segments of the community? you're right in the center topically of where people are talking about protecting our children by either doing this or doing that, right? You're the way we're being communicated with, it's almost like you can't do both sides, right? You can't cover all topics. How do you deal with that kind of issue, and how do you operate in this environment?
It's two different things for us, because we have a community theater that's a theater of place here in Missoula, and we are, like both Bryce and Josh have talked about, inclusive by design, inclusive by intention. And so we're trying to bring all kinds of folks in and I'll get in the room and talk about whatever we can. And many times that is dictated by the people that show up. But our community of practice and interest, which is our little red trucks, which go out all over the nation, we're in 22 different states today, doing theater out there. We've got 34 teams on the road. We'll go to 1,000 different locations, and we don't go beyond the bounds of the shows there. Presenters bring us in. We have 2 actors in the truck. They teach 60 kids a show over the course of a week, started on Monday, perform it on Friday or Saturday, or maybe both. And then they go to the next town. And in that time, what we're doing with children is developing their voice, empowering them to speak, empowering them to find themselves through the art, and giving them an opportunity to be something outside of what they're seeing, right? We don't talk to teachers. We don't say, hey, who's your biggest cut up? Hey, who's your biggest princess? We go in and audition cold, and those children have a chance to define themselves differently and work together. And that's that beautiful power of theater that we all know, right? Working together and developing something together and coming to the end different than when you started. That transcends
That's really important. What you're saying, if I'm interpreting this correctly, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're about a process, not a conclusion, right?
Absolutely.
So talk about that process. If you're not about a conclusion, if you don't have an actual indoctrination in the theater, and I'd like you all to talk about this. If you don't have a particular indoctrination agenda, and you've all said that you're all inclusive and so on, but if you're about a process but not about a conclusion, talk about why the process, what the purpose of the process of theater is about, and what that exploration is about within those different settings that you described, Mike, because you're going from place to place, and the settings are going to be different. The audiences are going to be different. Absolutely. The actors are going to be different. Every performance is new, right?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And for us, I'll start, gentlemen, and then I'll let you get in there. For us, because we're going from place to place, we have a pretty solid process. We teach the scripts the same way, we audition the same way. Of course, what happens in the audition and what happens with the kids is different in every city. And somebody grabs a character and they do something wild with it, and the tour actors say, well, of course they did. Who knew that? Oh my gosh, oh, that's amazing, right? The children don't know that they're so creative. They just take it for granted that they're going to do something cool. And the process is so much more important than the product in our children's theater, because that's where our mission lies, developing life skills in children through performing arts. And so when we do that, what we see is it's got this huge impact. They want to come back year after year. They want to be part of our productions. Some of them show up to college here and say, wow, didn't know there was a community theater. I only know you from the Little Red Truck. Wow, that's crazy. And they get involved with our productions here, which are, yes, they are about the product to some degree, but mostly they're about people finding out who they are and finding their people.
Well, the process creates the product. That's the thing that really disturbs me about so much about American life today, is that you start off with a conclusion, right? You start off with something that you want people to just accept, whereas what you really should be doing is exploring acceptance, right? When you're communicating, when you're reporting the news, you don't start off with a conclusion on the news. you go to where the facts lead you. If you're going to develop a product, you figure out what consumers want, and then you develop the product. You don't develop the product first and then tell them what they want. Even those innovators who create products we don't know we want are doing it informed by the consumer. So Josh, how do you deal with this idea of process versus conclusion? How do you take on a new work and explore it without trying to just imprint some meaning on the work from the very beginning before you even start your rehearsals?
So Mark, I'm interpreting process perhaps a little bit more broadly. I'm interpreting and want to take it towards the patterns of our business, how we do our business. Because I think one of the responsibilities we have coming out of COVID is to serve a much wider and more diverse population. Plus in King County, the county that we operate, the demographics are becoming much more diverse as each year continues. And so what we're up to is first making a long-term commitment in changing some of our business patterns in order to reach a more diverse audience.
Now, is it about diversity or is it about getting everyone into the theater? I mean,
it is about getting everyone into the theater, but if you look at who's coming today, and we've made a commitment to have our audience reflect at a minimum the demographics of King County, it means that we're going to have to interrupt our process, our business patterns, and make.
So the meaning of my question, Josh, forgive me for interrupting. The meaning of my question was, it's not just coming from a values point of view. It's also coming from a business point of view, isn't it? If you have a huge potential group of audience members sitting on the sidelines, they just don't come into the theater, you're leaving revenue on the table, aren't you?
Without a doubt. And the most growing portion of our population right now is Latinx. And we've successfully been able to launch a pretty amazing concert programming with all artists in Spanish. And I think the first year out of the box, about 40,000 people showed up. And so it's intentional. And it is also a big change in where we're spending our media dollars. We've dedicated ourselves to spending media dollars with outlets that are owned by people of color that are speaking to a more diverse population. And it is absolutely a great business choice to make. I'm appreciative that you brought that up, Mark.
Yeah, and we just completed a poll in which we asked, have you attended live theater in the past year? Now, this is a select audience, right? But even there, 20% of the people who are coming to view a theater show, and I'm the people who are on YouTube Live and LinkedIn and so on and so forth, they can't respond in real time. But 20% are not in your audience, and this is a select audience. Right. So Bryce, we've got a real potential here. We have to get everybody into those theaters. How do you approach it?
Well, I think you're exactly right about talking about processing. The mistake that people make when thinking about the arts is that one performance is the end of that process. But in reality, we want to think about each production as part of an audience process. We don't want one audience to come one time and say, look, our audience was diverse this time, right? None of our organizations who are on this Zoom call want that. So we're trying to look and say, okay, how do you structure your programming over several years? How do you structure your programs to challenge at different times and at different audiences, so that the process of theater is not just the creation of it, which is a really important process, but also the process of an audience learning over time or building community with the people around them. We often talk about, I'm from Denver originally. When I was a kid, we'd go to the Broncos games, and over time you'd learn to know who your seat neighbors would be on a regular occasion. And so you'd start to look for them. The same kind of community building can happen in the theater. And if we can think of each of those productions as one game that is going to have a result that helps build something together, then yeah, there's a tiny little bit of end process, quality, etc. But the whole experience with the theater over several years, there's the process that we want to look at.
How do you extend that experience beyond the event of the performance for both your audiences and your troupe, your company? Because as you say, Bryce, right, it's not just an event, right, Josh? It's not just a one-time thing. And many organizations are doing educational programming surrounding performances or particular plays. You have conclaves, discussion groups, receptions, there might be food involved. But how do you try to make this resonate beyond the event of the person buying a ticket, attending for an hour and a half and leaving?
Yeah, I mean,
Josh, or go ahead, Bryce.
well, I'm sorry, real quick. I mean, you're exactly right that you can certainly do talkbacks and community engagement events and those kinds of things to build community. But this is where community partnerships really thrive.
Community, right? Community is the whole thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, right, you're starting by thinking about what it is that each community needs to perform, and you're engaging them before you even announce that there is something that they can participate in. And so by the time you have announced that tickets are available for them, they already are well aware of how your organization is working with them. They already feel like they're part of the process. Buying a ticket is just a natural next step. And then most importantly, once they've had that experience with us through several iterations of pre-performance activities, then it's how do we make sure that they're already engaged in the next one so that it becomes a long-term community conversation.
Josh, Mike, you want to give a cut at this? How you create that sort of effervescence? I think community theater was the first social media event, right? Because it is all about community, right? Social media is about community. Community theater is about community. Josh, Mike, how do you ensure that your work resonates beyond the day of the event?
I could share a little bit. We're lucky to have a wonderful team on our staff as part of a department that we called education and community engagement. And so often this work happens year round, and some of it is tied to engagements that are coming to our theaters, and some of it is not. But ultimately, it's building relationships with people of all ages and building community with them. And that, I believe, helps set up a relationship. And then our hope is to turn them also into patrons of the theater, so they will feel like any three of our stages is an extension of their living room, is their home. And we're, I'm speaking of programs, whether it's Ailey Camp, which happens for people in middle school, to say Dance with Parkinson's, that happens for people with Parkinson's and their partners. We've got a host of programs like this that develop relationships with community members in all directions. And I believe that's, sure, it's a great strategy of maintaining this relationship, but it also just makes the world a better place.
The word trauma is overused. It's used for almost everything, but there is something about the facts of daily lives, the facts of your history, whether and we deal with a lot of different types of trauma. We've done work, for example, with the group that has created Greenwood Rising, which commemorates the 1920s massacre in Tulsa that destroyed the Black Wall Street neighborhood of Tulsa. We've dealt with Native peoples. We've dealt with various isms, of various kinds, racism, anti-Semitism, and so on and so forth, sexism. But also, everybody gets beaten up by life, right? Every day. You're a child, you go into school, and you happen to be the target of bullying that day. Or you have been the bully, right, Mike? You need to have some place to work it out where it's not in that environment, where it's a little bit more abstract, but maybe it helps you to process your emotions. How do how do you deal with that part of your work in a way that takes perhaps even a classic work and brings it to today and allows people to process their own feelings of daily life and help them to navigate in today's world?
I think that, when you talk about the process of working it out, it's working together and giving people an avenue to work together and giving them multiple avenues. It's not just the show. It may also be when we put out a call for what would you like to see next year, and let's talk about it and let's get on there and let's discuss it. When we have people talking about any number of things, I can tell you that when we put out our first call for scripts this last year, who would like to see what, and we were overwhelmed with Rent. Everyone wanted to see Rent. Everyone wanted to be involved with Rent, and we were looking at each other saying, "Why? Tell us why. We want to know, right?" And
what kind of answers did you get?
What's that?
What kind of answers did you get?
Oh, people talking about you got to find your voice and you got to be able, and especially in Montana, right? In Missoula, Montana, you got to be able to be who you are and not be afraid. You got to be able to deal with big things that other people aren't talking about. And for our community theater, amazing. It was simply amazing. Out on the road for our children's theater, it's very interesting because yes, of course, we're helping kids find their voice and we're developing like life skills, and those things are great. But we go to military bases all around the world. And one of the reasons that they bring us in is that transient nature of a military family, right? So the military family moves to a new base. Those kids don't know anybody. And MCT comes to town and they work with all these other kids. And all of a sudden, that new child has a bunch of friends. And that first day of school, when they go to the lunchroom to go sit down, they have somebody to eat lunch with, right? And I think we can all relate to that. You all want to find your people and you all want to be able to be okay with what's happening in life. We don't, there's a lot of trauma associated with those kids moving across the country or moving to a new country.
New country, new language, new environments. I mean, I grew up in that way, right? And so, there are all these differences, all these changes, all these different practices. The fact that you're going all around the world and helping kids process that. I mean, basically, we're all living the same kind of life because things are changing so rapidly. And what you're basically saying is that this process of theater, this process of performance, this process of selecting what you're going to present, all of this is part of that. Let's bring it back into something that we can discuss, we can process, we can control, right?
Very much so. And in a world of ChatGPT, right? In a world of art being created in ways that we recognize and we say it's art, and then we go, oh my gosh, created by AI. Working together as human beings, working together and dealing with things in the same room at the same time for a shared common goal, that's where we shine as humans, as people.
So we're going to go back around. We'll start with you, Mike, go to Josh, and we'll end up with Bryce. What is the next great thing in the next year? Because we've come out of COVID. Hopefully we don't go back in. Right. So we're moving forward. We're all living in this environment in which we're trying to grapple with a whole range of issues, including social polarization, but also you're grappling with the fact that people are becoming media obsessed and a little bit isolated because we can get basically live theater or not live theater, electronic theater into our living rooms. We actually don't have to come together anymore in order to experience great performances. What's happening in the next year, 18 months in your world that you think is going to ensure that your organization stay vital? Mike, let's stay with you, and then we'll go to Josh, and then Bryce, we're going to give you the last word.
We're reaching out and looking for new and intentionally soliciting new voices for our children's scripts, so that we're hearing a different kind of voice, so we can celebrate the commonality of all different kinds of people out on the road.
That's interesting. So basically, whatever you've done before defines what you're doing next, because you're not going to do the same thing.
we're going to add those in. We're not going to do it in place of. We're going to add those
Right.
in because there's obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but we've been doing some of these scripts for 40 years. Everybody knows them, for better or for worse, and so adding new voices is important to that.
Well, it's true for any art form, right? If you're a musician and you're only playing the golden oldies, you become a golden oldie. Whereas when you keep creating, right, you keep yourself fresh. Josh, what's happening in Seattle for the next 18 months that you're particularly proud of?
Well, first of all, Mark, I completely disagree with the statement you just said.
Oh, okay.
You do have to come together in person to experience great performances. Sure, you can tune in on Zoom like people are here, and it's nowhere near the same ever as going and showing up. It is, I'm just going to say it is a lesser experience performing arts on your computer. So I want to just refute that and not let that slip by. There's a lot going on in the Seattle area. And I would say if there's one thing that I know so many of my colleagues in Seattle are focused on, are concerned about, it's that we must change our region in a way that better enables artists to make a living and stay here doing only their art. And it's a big pickle jar for us to figure out. But we must do that in our region in order for our performing arts sector to stay healthy. Local arts matter a whole lot.
Well, thank you for correcting me, Josh. I'm always happy to be educated, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Bryce?
You also can agree to disagree too. I'm down with that. I just wanted to be real clean about that notion.
No, I actually agree with you. My most memorable experiences have always been live. If you look at that sort of immediacy and being in the moment and having someone sometimes in a performance which is great and sometimes not so great, but that particular person affects you and you have that immediacy, there's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. Bryce, what are you particularly proud of in the next 18 months that you're going to be doing? And what will you be doing that is perhaps a departure from what you've done in the last years?
Sure, yeah. Well, we're particularly excited that our brand new facility will be coming online. It's a renovation actually, but we'll have 3 full theaters available to us in our new facility here. So that will make a big difference for us. But in terms of exploration of things we haven't done before, we're really looking at the concept of how it is that younger generations, and we're really talking Gen Z and below, how are they choosing to engage in performance? And we're really looking at sort of short form performance experiences that are sort of like, I guess, like a TikTok concept, but of live theater in a 20 or 30 minute forum as opposed to a forum. And how do we get them to put their voice into expressing through live theater together as opposed to through TikTok or whatever. So we're kind of exploring the digital amalgamation of live theater and how it is that we can make it an in-person experience, but that feels and mimics that same sense of social appreciation from their peers. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Very, very cool. Bryce Alexander, CEO and Artistic Director of the Naples Players, Josh LaBelle, Executive Director of the Seattle Theater Group, and Mike Morelli, Executive Director of Missoula Children's Community Theater. Thank you so much for sharing your great work. Please thank your people, your staffs, your boards, your funders, everybody who supports your work. You're so important. You really are so important to the fabric of the United States, you and your fellows. This ability to bring people together in this immediate experience of performance that allows us all to think through our lives is so critical to our own joy. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day, all.